So I am very new to the study of wrestling. I just found out about this association a few months ago. I am thrilled to be here, and I'm really grateful to the organizers for including me. And I just love seeing how welcoming and supportive this community gathered here has been. I only recently rediscovered wrestling itself, which I hadn't watched since I was a very small child. And I noticed as I watched, I felt like I was recovering something from my past, and simultaneously, I was envisioning this, now I can say in retrospect, completely delusional future for myself. I've walked with a cane for 10 years, but I was completely convinced in my early days of rediscovering wrestling that I would be looking for a training gym and becoming a wrestler soon. So, it occurred to me that I was having this particular experience of time, and a really enjoyable one that wasn't on offer to me anywhere else. So my focus turned to time. So let me share a screen with you. I have a few slides to put up here. Bear with me while I make sure I do this right. And you'll tell me, I hope, um if my slides aren't scrolling or if you can't see. So we already know quite a bit about how time operates in some of the other performance or entertainment types that intersect in wrestling. So we know, for instance, time is a defining feature of theater, where you have this coexistence within a bounded space of an audience who's living in their real world timeline, but accepting this invitation to immersion in whatever times and spaces are represented on stage. And we also know a lot about time as a defining feature of sport. You have, for instance, the history of the shot clock in basketball. You have, say, the football hour that takes 3 hours of ordinary time to complete, timeouts. We could go on and on. Sports tends to masquerade as an expression, as a direct expression of a sort of primal or universal impulse toward conflict. But I'm on the side of Dunning here, who's argued that what's really interesting is how social attitudes toward conflict shape our taste or distaste for a particular sport in a particular time and place, and that sports rise and fall in popularity as a result of their deep structure, part of which is how that sport uses time. Sorry, I'm getting messages about having to update my device. Let me try to get back on board here. Okay, apologies. Um, so we also have, more broadly speaking, games. Time is also a definitive feature here in terms of how is play organized into games and tournaments or series, and how is time part of the rules in the way a game presents itself as fair? How is time a strategic resource for the players? What's special about wrestling, of course, is its intersection of these domains in its self-aware use of kayfabe, which I want to reconsider as a technology of time. So time as we live it. This isn't something that's entirely or even mostly accounted for by clocks. It's also not strictly a matter of nature. So yes, we have sunrise and sunset to mark out a day, but then we also have the workday, the weekend, holidays, purely social constructions. And then we all know how time seems to move differently on a good day or a bad day, particularly when there's a misalignment of the tempos imposed on us by society and our own emotional or biological tempos. So you can think of this in terms of injury recovery time, um, expectation time or anticipatory time, grief time, aging. In these situations, we experience serious conflict between our own timelines and those of the labor market or of the social calendar. So there's a $10 word for this matter. Chronosynosis is a word for how powers align themselves behind particular regimes of time. So we can see a regime of time acted out in something as big as a dictator, say, projecting a whole new world order into some distant and glorious future. We could see it enacted in something as structured as a new bell schedule for a particular school district. We can see it on the tiny, tiny micro scale of a group of teenagers advising each other how soon would be too soon to text back a crush. Enactments of time regimes like these can become neatly nested within one sort of master system, but what we see more often is how different regimes of time tangle, contradict, or resist each other. And so Edelstein, Gerolanos, and Wheatley, those are the authors who coined that term, chronosynosis, wrote, and I'm quoting here, power operates by arranging, managing, and scaling temporal regimes and conflicts. At the same time, these fault lines function as seams of structural weakness and possibility. Power is often undone in the cut and thrust of temporal antagonisms. So I took this quote from Terence Grip, which is from the Association's own journal, talking about how in his view kayfabe originated in a clash between temporal regimes. He tells us in this quote how the temporal regime of the daytime labor market clashed with the temporal regime of the wrestlers' evening labor market, and by his account, kayfabe was born. And while I take his word for it, it ultimately doesn't even matter whether he's correct or incorrect. It's simply the fact that a wrestler, someone embedded in this world, is thinking about kayfabe in terms of temporalities. That alone would be interesting to me. But time is important not just as a practical matter of what are we going to do when and for how long, but it's also fundamental to how we make meaning as humans in the world. So I'm going to throw a bunch of questions at you that relate to both time and big moral concerns about living on Earth. So do we work by the clock, or do we work until dark or till the job is done? Do we organize the day by bodily impulse and circadian rhythm, or by a shared normative sequence of activities? Do we live fast, die young, or do we let visions or fears of the future define our present? Is it too soon, as courts often say when they're asked for justice, or is it long past time for a particular form of justice? Is starting over ever possible? Is this even our real life, or is this just the twinkling of an eye before we enter eternity? I would love to go on and on with these questions. There's so many moral concerns that entail clashing regimes of time. But let's turn to the wrestling. And I argue that fundamental moral concerns like these that I've named here are played out on a structural level, a deep structural level that lies beneath and is not always in agreement with those storylines where we tend to locate the morality play of wrestling. So if you think about how the referee's arm, instead of a stopwatch or a timer, counts out a pin, through that action, fairness is located in the corruptible body of the referee, not in mechanical measurement. You can think of retconning of storylines and character reinventions. There's a flouting of linear cumulative time. So we see The Undertaker, for instance, rises from the dead, reinvents himself as American Badass and then as the Dead Man. And all this is happening while we're watching the aging, balding body of this quintessential company man pull off the longest, steadiest career in WWE history. So there's a story being told here on a deep level about the conditions and limits of self-invention over a lifetime in the ways that Mark Calloway and his various characters engage with and mobilize time. And time is notably a resource for heels to exploit. Christopher Majeski, I'm not sure I'm saying his name right. He also comes from that same conversation that Terence Grip was in. He pointed to Sasha Banks' use of a stamp for signing autographs and contracts as, quote, pure heel heat. So here she is with her bedazzled stamp. This stamp, yes, it communicates bossness, but it also puts efficiency, valuing one's own time highly, and again, the mechanical in a negative light, in a heelish light. On the flip side, though, a wrestler told Tyson Smith that to perform as a heel, you have to, quote, think of it like you're being paid by the hour. Take your time. You go slow and milk everything, end quote. Time in that conceptualization is something to think of in terms of wage labor, but also a personal possession, something you claim, reclaim, take. And when he says to milk everything, this makes me think of Roman Reigns bragging after his first appearance as a heel that he could have stood there 15 more minutes saying nothing. So a heel can milk an audience of time and nourish himself with that time. And it turns out this isn't actually contrary to Sasha Banks. We can say that the time that fans stood in line waiting for her autograph is time that she milked from them, elevating her own legend, her own status, nourishing herself. So time is a commodity in and around the ring, or rather, it's used as. And wrestlers are very creative in how they use this and also how they're managing discordant temporal regimes, or we might say something like different currencies of time. And I noticed today when Milan and Holly and Aaron were talking about the system of promotions and the pressures of the labor market for wrestlers who are trying to break into the big time, how this system structures for wrestlers an experience of living for the future to the point of possibly accepting more pain or trouble than is actually bearable or good for them in the present, and actually devaluing their own past. There are so many subtle instances and so many blatant instances of the WWE organization using time as something like a character in itself. So here we have a commercial for WWE Speed where some of the fastest and toughest WWE superstars do battle with time itself. Even more cartoonishly, I borrowed this cartoon from Drew Jeffries' article on wrestling comics. We have the temporal displacement ray. Yes, it's a comic book trope, but it also brings to mind moments of temporal displacement in wrestling performances, like when Undertaker suddenly appears on the scene as if he's teleported, or the time I think Mankind interviewed Dude Love to predict the return of Cactus Jack. So we have two simultaneously on screen and one enters. It's this fantasy of temporal displacement, or more specifically, temporal simultaneity, that it belongs just as much to wrestling as to the comics. So, what I'm arguing here through this variety of instances is that the experience of time that an immersive event like a wrestling match can yield is more than a way to take us out of the grind of daily life and into an effervescent state or a flow state. It is that, but it's also more. And I'm arguing its deep structure is something that can affect us or reach us on a fundamental moral level about questions of how we should live out our days. And an underanalyzed element of wrestling's deep structure is how pro wrestling makes use of and represents time and temporal regimes, and what this means to fans, what this means for how we understand kayfabe. So I'm working on a meta-analysis of as much as I can of the excellent theory that's already been done on wrestling in order to draw out these threads, particularly the work on kayfabe, because I want to develop a more robust theory of kayfabe as a technology of time. And I'll be accompanying this with a deeper dive into The Undertaker as both the laborer, Mark Calloway, and as his persona to address that tension between the timelines they're living out and the temporal regimes that each of those represents. And I think this all sits well with Fontaine, Lane, and Altman's argument that kayfabe may be a model of sociality more broadly, which also sits well with Litherland's observation that kayfabe is something we should think of in the plural. It's developed ad hoc, different ways in different sites, and perhaps one key criterion for discerning kayfabes is going to be in the way that each of them mobilizes time. So I'm continuing to work on this project, and I will be studying up this summer because I have gotten approval to teach a sociological class about pro wrestling in the fall, which I'm very excited about, but not quite ready for yet. So it'll be a busy summer. So let me put my contact info up here one more time. Please contact me if you're interested in collaborating, if you're interested in reminding me that you have a book that I should put on my syllabus, if you're interested in guest speaking in my class, or if you're simply interested in setting me straight on anything I've said because I am so new to wrestling, or if I can get very specific, talking about what Rhea Ripley was doing, what she was referencing when she said to Becky Lynch, "You got time to give up, Becky. You got time," just last week at WrestleMania. So I will leave it there, and I hope to learn from you all. I hope we can get a conversation going.